Amen. Happy Mother's Day, girls. And we have a guest speaker today for a while, Brother Larry Moxley. I don't know a lot about you, brother, to tell them anything about you. So, anyway, thank you for coming and bringing the copy of the Ark of the Covenant. It looks really, really good. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, brother.
One nice thing to know about me is I just live around the corner, and I normally just walk to church, but that weighs about 35 pounds, so I didn't walk to church today. My wife drove me and parked the van right out there. I am a businessman, and I have my own consulting company, and I have taught a class here for 10 years called The Abundant Life, which I'll leave here and go teach at 11 o'clock. I've had the privilege in the last 8 or 9 years to travel around the world doing missionary work in the Amazon jungle, out of Peru to Kenya, Tanzania, Kosovo, India, El Salvador, and China last April. So it's a thrill in March of this year to have had a chance to take my 17-year-old to go to Israel with the church and with our pastors, and he and I spotted this in Jerusalem, and we couldn't leave for home without it. So it's a privilege to have a chance to come share it with you. I want to tell you a couple things about Israel, but before I do that, I just want to share something very special about this piece here, and I want to do that in 1 Samuel. And I understand you've been teaching in the Old Testament, and you've probably studied this, but I'm going to look at 1 Samuel 6:10 and a few verses preceding that or following that. Then the men did so. They took 2 milk cows, and they hitched them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. They set the ark of the Lord on the cart. They set the ark of the Lord on the cart, and the chest with the gold rats and the images of their tumors. Then the cows headed straight for the road of Beth Shemesh. We stood on the very spot and looked down the road that the oxen or the cows pulled that wooden cart towards Beth Shemesh and to the place where it was returned back into the hands of the Jews. And so there's a battle that took place, and they took the ark into the battle. And the thrill for me is not to have this. The thrill for me is to look at these passages and say, by God's grace, I went and stood at the very place where God delivered His ark back into the hands of Israel. And it's a special blessing to have been there and had a chance to see that. So the Bible, when I read these passages now, I don't see the words. I see that place where we stood. And there was a test that they were looking for. Would the cows go left or right, or would they go straight back to Beth Shemesh to where the Israelites were? And they knew if it turned left, what they feared was not the God of the Jews, but some other God. But they said, if it goes straight back into the hands of the Jews, we know it's the God of Israel that's brought this. They lost 50,000 people, and they had the tumors, and they had the disease. And so to go and stand physically and look down the valley and look down that road and stand at the spot where the cart was going to go left or right or straight back into the hands of the Jews was an absolutely blessed moment for me and my son. And I want to share just a couple more things with you about how that's changed studying Scripture for me, because now you have something on the screen there. The difference for me, having gone and walked the land, and your teacher, pastor, will probably verify this, having been there himself, and any of you, it's the difference between watching that movie on TV that he's been playing and sitting on a set, putting on a set of glasses and being able to see that same thing in 3D. Because I don't see the words anymore. I see me and my 17-year-old son on this little tell looking down the valley and where that cart came, and with our 35 other people and our 2 pastors. And I'm standing there where God delivered back into the hands of the Israelites the Ark of the Covenant. And I want to talk about how special that is. But one of the things we did, and this is what I think the way in which God blesses you if you make the effort to go and walk His land. The first place we visited in Israel, just outside of Tel Aviv, was Pastor Roger knew of where this location was, and it wasn't on our tour. We went to the Valley of Elah. And I'm going to turn over and I'm going to just show you how these passages change in your mind and in your heart when you've been there. And the Valley of Elah is interesting because that's the place where, and I'm going to be looking at 1 Samuel 17, verse 40. The Valley of Elah is where David slew Goliath. And we all know that story, and we know it very well. And the thing that caught me is I had my 17-year-old who's senior class president at Centennial High, and he's going to graduate in a couple of weeks, and he's going back east to Lynchburg, Virginia, to college at Liberty University. So he's my last of 4 children. But he's a teenage boy about the age of David when he confronted Goliath. And so he and I had a chance with our group to walk down the little wadi, this little brook, where David knelt and picked up these 5 stones when he went to face Goliath. Let's look at that for just a minute. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. Now, that's a story when you're reading it out of Scripture, but we walked in that brook. We stood in that brook. And my 17-year-old and I knelt down in that brook, and we brought back our own stones. And I want to share something with you. And he put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had, and in a sling that was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth. And you can go on and on and on. Well, what I talked to my son about as we were in that brook, and we were bringing back our own stones as a memorial to this teaching in Scripture here, I asked him, I said, son, what do you think a guy your age was thinking when he knelt down here where we are, and he's about to go stand out on the valley and face a 9-foot giant? Mm-hmm. And we talked about that. And so what we did together when we came back to the hotel, we read further. And here's what he was thinking about. He says, then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give you the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. That's our answer. He was not timid. He was not afraid. This was not a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old youth like was standing before me in my son. This was a messenger of God set fully ready to deliver judgment against the Philistine army. And so David basically said, this day I will kill you and take your head and feed the carcasses of your dead soldiers to the birds of the air. So when we knelt down in this very spot, I asked my son, what in the world was on his mind? And we were able to go back to the hotel. That's what was on his mind. God had called him to do something. And then we then stepped out onto the valley and saw where he did it. And you need to ask your question. It says back in verse 40, he chose for himself 5 smooth stones. Well, he's only going to stand before Goliath, and the rules of the engagement were whoever won, the other army would submit. So why did he get 5 stones? Well, we find later in the Old Testament, not here, Goliath had 4 brothers. So he filled that sack up with enough rocks to deal with all 5 of those giants if he needed to, but that's not what God wanted to do. So I just kind of wanted to share that with you a little bit, but then I want to tell you a story about how God has opened, and I may need to go back and read one more verse of Scripture, Pastor, and I'll make a point and tell a story here. Let me get to it. I want to read Isaiah 49, 5 and 6, because these are important passages. This is God speaking. I'm going to tell you a story about Joppa, the place we went after the Valley of Elah and the struggle between David and Goliath. In Isaiah 49, 5 and 6, and this is what God has done for me when I get to the story. Indeed, he says, it is too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also give you as to a light unto the Gentiles, that you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth. And I usually read verse 5, but I'm trying not to take up too much of your time. So right here, Jesus, before he walked the earth as a man is telling us that it wasn't enough that God would send him just for the Jews, but for the Gentiles as well. Now, I have used that verse so many times in my own teaching and my own witnessing and trying to share with Jews that salvation's meant for Jew and Gentile alike. Never have I captured those passages in a way that those passages right there, Isaiah 49, 5 and 6, I just read 6, prophesy what God did in Joppa. And I stood on the Tel of Joppa, the ruins of Joppa that's some 4,000 years old. And those verses probably don't bring to your mind Peter and Jonah. But they do mine now, because I stood where God fulfilled that calling of the Lord, those words of the Lord. He was meant for Jew and Gentile alike. How do you think that through? Well, Jonah, in the Old Testament, was there at Joppa. And it was there that he had received a call of the Lord to go to the Ninevites, which is in Mosul, Iraq. Gentiles. And from Joppa, he got on a boat, and he's the only prophet that ever disobeyed the Lord, and he took off to sea, head to Tarshish. And a storm came up, and you know the story. He was thrown in the water, swallowed by the fish. Okay? There's a second story that happened in the New Testament, and I'm going to tie them together and bring you back to Isaiah 49, 5, and 6. That second story is Peter. Peter was in Joppa. And Peter had somebody from Caesarea by the Sea, which is about 30 miles north of Joppa, right below Tel Aviv on the coast. And a man named Cornelius, a Roman centurion, a Gentile. And he heard about Peter's work in Lydda, which is 10 miles southeast of Joppa, right on the beach. Lydda's down here. He had made a crippled man walk. So this Gentile, this Roman Gentile, heard about it, sent some men to Joppa 2,000 years later from where Jonah was. I want you to think about it. Same city, same little town on the beach, Joppa. Two men by the same name. Peter was called what? Simon Bar-Jonah. Two men called to do the same thing. One in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament. First time in the Old Testament that salvation was sent to the Gentiles was from Joppa when Jonah went to the Ninevites. The first time in the New Testament when salvation was sent to the Gentiles was when Peter was called to Caesarea by the Sea from Joppa to go see Cornelius. And Cornelius is the first Gentile converted in the New Testament. So, when I take that Old Testament story about Jonah and that New Testament story about Peter, and then I go back and I think about Isaiah 49, 5 and 6, where Jesus says in his own words, pre-incarnate, it's not enough that I'm sent for the Jews, but for the Gentiles. I'm standing on the spot where God delivered on that promise, And I have studied the Bible and taught for all of these years. I have never once thought about those three things together. But standing there on that little tell, that little excavation that's 4,000 years old, all of these words and these scriptures and these passages just started coming together in my heart. And to be able to stand there where God delivered on Isaiah 49, 5 and 6, to me, is only a miracle by His grace and blessing, because I've read these passages hundreds of times and never tied them together. You mentioned, Pastor, just a few minutes ago about Abraham being called out of Ur of Chaldees. Well, when we went to Beersheba, to Abraham's well, it's about 4,000 years old. That's the spot where he called it to. And as we were sitting under a little lean-to in the shade, everybody knows the story of Ishmael and Hagar. And when Hagar was sent away by Abraham at the insistence of his wife Sarah. Well, Pastor Roger was giving us a little sermonette, and he says, oh, by the way, if you'll turn around and look down that wash, that's where he sent her off. We all know the story about Ishmael and Hagar and Abraham and Isaac and Sarah. And we've read that, but to turn around and stand where these stories unfolded is something that you have to go and see to fully appreciate the depth of God's meaning. And He gives you a blessing to just bring all this together in your heart and mind. And it's been a privilege to do those kinds of things. One other story, and I don't know how long, Pastor, you want me to do this, or if you want folks to ask any questions. When we got to Israel, another thing that was powerful to me and my son, and I had that it was, I think God magnified those blessings because I had my last son with me and he's leaving home. We were in Jerusalem, and of course, the first thing you see when you enter Jerusalem is the Dome of the Rock. I want you to think about the Dome of the Rock. That's the place where Abraham brought to sacrifice his son. That's the place where David went and bought the threshing floor to build his temple that God said, no, you're not going to do that. You have too much blood in your hands. That's the very spot where his son did build the temple. That's the place now that's been defiled and taken over by the Muslims, but it's the spot where Christ will come back one day and come stand. But it's also the very spot prophetically where the Antichrist, when that period of tribulation comes, will come in and first make a deal and allow the Jews to worship and sacrifice again, but then he will defile that very place. And I was talking to Pastor Phil about this on the way back, and he said if you look at the 50th Psalm, I think it is, there are many who believe that is why that has been such a contentious spot throughout the world for all of existence, is because Jews believe, and he has some other passages that I haven't looked at yet, that that's the very spot where God drew forth creation. And remember, Scripture tells us that Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden. So when you look at that very spot that is so contentious today and is controlled by the Muslims today, and we Christians cannot go inside, I think back when you were there, that was possible. Today, that is not possible.
We went in.
Yeah, that is not possible. Around that area, in the court of the Gentiles area, there's two interesting things where Jesus went in and turned the tables over with money changers to go walk in that courtyard to be there. It was awesome. But the one thing that struck me in just such a mighty way is in Matthew 5, 1 through 7, and focus on verse 5 when you want to look that up on your own time. Jesus is out in the desert being tempted by Satan. And his last temptation, I believe, was at the southeast corner, the highest pinnacle, around where Satan sat and offered all of this and said, throw yourself down, the Lord will send legions of angels and your foot will not hit one stone. Well, that's the place. And so we were in Israel or Jerusalem 5 days. Every day, wherever we were, I would look for that point to know that that's the last time that Satan tempted the Lord. So when we got our appointment to go up onto the court of the Gentiles and walk around that area, we were in our group. It took a lot of time to get to that point. And I got Richie off to the side, and I said, as soon as we're free, you and I are going over to that southeast corner. I want to put my shoulders on both connections of that wall and stand and have a picture made standing in that corner looking up. And I didn't hear the briefing at the end because I was too focused. It was interesting. Nobody was over there. Thousands of people around. Nobody was over there. Well, I didn't hear because I was too anxious to get over there that we were told not to do that because the Muslims don't like that. They know that story. So anyway, my son and I, we traipsed on over there about 100 yards away, and we stood just like in that corner with our shoulders touching both walls looking up, and we had our photo made looking at the very spot where Christ was tempted for the last time by Satan. And I understand those things, and I've read those things so many times. They did not have the meaning and the depth of meaning to me that they do today now that I've come back from walking the land. And it's just been a phenomenal blessing and pleasure and gift to go there myself and with my son. There's a place when you're walking around. How many know the story of the woman and the 2 mites who gave the 2 mites and the teaching about the rich man gave a lot, but I tell you, she gave all she had. Who went and stood right where she put those 2 mites in the basket? You know, it's different now. It's different. I don't see the words. I see that place in those arches. Yes, sir.
You know, you've read a lot of books about the Bible lands.
Yes, sir.
After I was over there, I could read a book and tell whether the man was there or not.
There you go. Yeah.
You
It's
can
obvious.
tell,
Yeah.
in a teacher
Yes.
that is teaching, you can tell whether they walk the land. Because it's real.
It absolutely is. Let me tell you how that is so important, because what you don't realize is how small Israel is. Okay, number one. Kern County is 8,000 square miles. Israel's only 10. Now, we hear that Syria and Lebanon have hundreds and hundreds of missiles aimed at Israel. I want you to think about that burden this way. Think about Wasco and Delano and having 500 missiles between those two cities aimed at Bakersfield. That's the distance they're talking about. Okay? That's the distance that's the risk they live with every single day. Okay? It's that close. And one of the things, Pastor, is you see the Mount of Olives, where the Lord in Acts 1:8, the last words, the place where he stood when he was telling the disciples, now made apostles, to go to Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth as he's resurrected or ascending back into heaven. To go stand at that very area, that location where that happened, and to know also that's the very place he's going to come back. And then when you walk, you only walk down 100, 200 yards, and you're at the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay? And when you look down past the Garden of Gethsemane is the Kidron Valley, and you walk across that and the highways they have there now, and walk up. Right there is that corner I just talked about, Matthew 5, 1 through 7, where Satan tempted the Lord the last time. It is all so close. That's the place in the garden where he knelt down at the night he was arrested, the early morning hours, and sweat drops of blood. But you know what happened? Let me say this thing, and I'll get. What happened there is from the Mount of Olives down to the Garden of Gethsemane, all the way down to the base of the Kidron Valley. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of graves above ground in stone sarcophagi that are kind of about this high. And you know why? Because the Arabs know the Bible, and they know that Jesus is coming back to that very spot just 100 or 200 yards away, and they want to be as close to the Lord when he comes back as they can possibly be. Go ahead, sir.
There's a picture of all that right there on the wall. I don't know if you saw it or not.
I did not.
Were you?
Yeah. This is that point I'm talking about right there. That's that point. That's that point where Satan tempted. So when you go and see how close all of that is, when you go out on the Sea of Galilee and you have the guy stop the motor and you're just coasting and you're thinking about both the time going this way where Jesus calmed the water, and when he sent coming back the other way the disciples ahead of himself after he preached, and they saw him walking on the water in the early hours of the morning. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely. And there's a statement that the words and the symbols that Jesus uses, you cannot appreciate his teaching fully unless you've been there. And as an example, right around the Sea of Galilee is the Arba, and this big mountain, the cut in the mountain where the wind comes through and brings the seas up real high. Way up high, at the top of a hill, there's a city. And he taught, and he said, a city on the top of a hill cannot hide its light. And I think we all believe that as he was standing down there somewhere on the Sea of Galilee and looking up, he saw that city. And when you're the highest thing in the surrounding area, you can't hide your light. And we shouldn't hide our light as Christians. And so it's things like that that have just brought God's Word, His teaching, and His meaning to life for me in a way that was not possible no matter how hard I studied and how much work I tried to do. I've been all over the world, as I shared with you, doing this missionary work, been blessed mightily. But it has been entirely different since I've had the chance to walk the Holy Land. And we covered the entire country pretty well. Last thing I'll share with you, any questions, and Pastor, I'll get out of his way. To go down to En-Gedi, and if you remember the story when King Saul was chasing David and trying to kill him, and his men were hiding, David and his men were hiding in a cave. And Saul came in to do what he needed to do, and David went up and cut a corner off of his robe. And the king went out, he went down and across the way, and David came out and yelled at him, "I'm not your enemy." And he held up, he said, "I could have killed you this day." But we went to that very spot, where David and Saul had that encounter. And so when I read about that now, I'm not seeing the words. I'm seeing the place. I'm seeing where God actually had that event take place, and where He protected at the moment both Saul and King David. And so it's been a phenomenal blessing. And this is something I bring back, and I can sit down and I can look at that from my office, and I think about all of those things. And I think about that young boy of mine that's going away to study to be a pastor. So if there's a chance, I'll answer any questions. Yes, ma'am?
Can you explain a little bit about what the different things on the earth represent?
The pastor would be better suited to do that. The one point I would make, though, if you were not in church 3 or 4 weeks ago when we had the Lord's Supper right before Easter, Pastor Phil had me bring that, and then he got the crown of thorns that we saw. Both come from an acacia tree. The crown of thorns they stuck in the Lord's hand, and the wood that they used to build the ark and then cover in gold were both made out of acacia wood. And I will tell you, when we were down at, I think we were down at Beersheba at Abraham's well, we had, most of us, there's 37 of us, probably 30 of us had gotten back on the bus. And that's the crown that Pastor Phil brought back with him that you saw a few weeks ago. And someone said, this guy's out there, he's going to make a crown of thorns. So everybody got off the bus. We had 37 people standing around this guy for about 10 minutes. And not a word was spoken. As you watched him take off a branch about this long, and you have needles that are at least 2 inches long. Very dramatic, very dangerous, very sharp. And you could see him working. It took him a long time to pick the leaves off because he was going to strip it all the way down. And then as he began to bend it carefully and weave it to make a crown. And by the time, one young lady, I should say, she's 30 years old, she went down on the bus sobbing and could not watch him finish. That's how powerful that was to her. So when we finished, and he opened his Bible, sat there, my son got a beautiful picture, and then he set that crown of thorns on top of the Bible. And so when I read about that crown of thorns, I think about us down at Abraham's well, standing under that tree, watching David, our Jewish guide, make this crown of thorns. And I can see visually that crown, and I can see what it would do when someone smashed it onto the base of his head. And so those are the things that merely studying Scripture don't fully come to fruition in your heart. And so I'm going to let your pastor, who's the expert on that, do that. Yes, sir?
I just have one question. It's pretty simple. You know, when you're there and you're in these places that you have spoken about,
Yes, sir.
The Holy Spirit comes upon you. When the Holy Spirit touches my heart, I feel that it's the Holy Spirit that I get cold chills all over my whole body.
Sure.
Is that the experience you have?
I'm an emotional guy. In my business life, people are afraid of me. And I've kind of got a tough guy. But I'm an emotional guy when it comes to the Lord and the Lord's work. And I was brought to tears daily over there.
Yes.
There's just no way to say it and deny it. I think the Holy Spirit's there, but I think God is coming out of your heart and blessing you and making you understand in a way that emotionally and physically you couldn't without seeing these things. And I get emotional. I cry.
Right, your body can't control
It's a truth that, and think about it. I'm a big proponent of God. He deals with things in the Old Testament and the New Testament the same, and He will at the end of times. What's going to happen when the Jews at the end of the tribulation are saved and drawn back to the Lord? What's the first thing that's going to happen? You and I would think it would be great joy and jubilation. The first thing that's going to happen is they're going to fall down on their knees and they're going to sob and cry, because they will then recognize fully what their rejection of Christ really meant to Him. And so, for me, I get those kinds of emotions because I guess it's joyous, but I have to express it by shedding my tears. And that's what's going to happen at the end of the tribulation with the nation of Israel, the remnant that's finally saved and drawn back. They're going to recognize fully what their rejection meant, and it's going to shame them in a way that we can't understand. And it's a powerful, bless you, it's a powerful thing to have some ability to identify with that. Somebody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you know, I've been wanting to take my wife and I go over there, but, you know, one thing about it is I couldn't stand anything if anything happened to her. What's the danger element over there when you're there?
I have two answers to that. Number one, since I live right around the corner, I'm an 08er, I live in Oildale. Someone asked me that question before I left. If it's time for God to call me, would I rather Him call me from Oildale or Israel? Okay. When I go out into the jungle or out into the deserts of Africa or into the communist country of China or into the Muslim and Hindu environment of India, I've quit worrying about my own life. I've committed my heart and soul to the Lord. So if you're going to go, just go and trust everything in the Lord. I mean, that's not good safety advice, but as a believer, a long time ago, I trusted God with my very existence to go serve Him in a mission field. And to me, I'm not interested, nor do I have the heart and courage to be a martyr. But whatever day and moment that comes for me to go be with the Lord, it would certainly be a pleasure if it happened in Israel instead of here.
Amen.
That's the way I look at it. And so I'm the wrong person to ask that question because the danger doesn't get... We didn't feel trouble. Remember when we went, lots of tension. They had not yet selected their new prime minister, and our current president was sending signals that were not very friendly towards Israel in light of the thought that it would probably be the current prime minister, Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of tension in the air, a lot. But those are things I personally, and I took my son, and and he and I had the same conversation. You're not ready to give your life up for the Lord, Dad, let's go.
Amen.
So I just don't.
You really don't think much about it.
You don't, and we never felt uncomfortable. Do you have that question?
Yeah, how expensive is a trip like that?
It's about $4,500 a person.
Per person.
Yeah, but that takes care of your flight, your hotel, all your travel when you're over there, and most of your meals. I think we had buffets morning and night, almost every day. So that really covers a lot. Yes, sir.
This is just a response to Brother Bill over here. In the Word, he says that if I take care of the sparrows of the sky, surely wouldn't I take care of you? And that's just something I thought I'd say.
Somebody else? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did you get to go to Hebron, down to the cave of Mephibosheth?
Yes. No, we did not go to Hebron. No. We went to Masada and we went to the Herodian. We did not go to Hebron.
Well,
we did not.
That was something.
That's another reason to go back. Yes, sir.
What kind of rules are you bound by when you're over there?
On a personal level, I'm not bound by much. I just don't. The only thing we couldn't do was go into the Dome of the Rock because of the Muslim control. You have to be careful, you have to be respectful, but I didn't feel restrained by any particular rules at all. At all. I just didn't. Yes, ma'am?
Do we have to be, the women that go from here, do they have to have their faces covered or
No.
anything in their
No.
faces when you
No.
go?
No. Yeah. The one interesting thing is when we went to Bethlehem, to the birthplace of the Lord, that is controlled by the Arabs. That is not controlled by the Jews. And you have to change buses. You have to go through a checkpoint. You have to have an Arab guide. And it's depressing and heartbreaking to see what's happened to Bethlehem. Absolutely heartbreaking. It's still a thrill to go there and to be there and to go to the spot where they believe that he was born. Let me share two things with you. Everybody knows the artist stuff of the Lord's Supper, right? Okay. Everybody knows that that's not right, correct? I got a beautiful piece of silver and with gold overlay of the Lord's Supper in New York City right after 9/11. My son was there to play at Carnegie Hall when he was 11, 12 years old. Beautiful piece. I can't even hardly stand to look at it now that I fully understand it. They didn't eat that way. They didn't eat at a table. They ate laying down. So that whole depiction throughout, our culture and time is wrong. The second thing that surprised me is how many understand that Joseph and Jesus were carpenters. Raise your hand. I know some of you have been raised with that. Come on, don't be afraid. It's probably not true. He was probably a stonemason. There was nothing at that time made in that area out of wood. The furniture, the houses, it's all made out of stone. Okay, and Zechariah, where Joseph was working about 5 miles from Nazareth, is probably the place where he met Mary, and that was a place that was growing at the time, and it was all made out of stone. And all the archaeology is everything was made and built out of stone. And if you're laying down, reclining as you eat, you don't need a wooden table to sit dinner on. They had little stone things that they set things on and they ate out of. So that was one of the biggest shocks to me, and I asked Pastors Roger and Phil about that, and they said, there's a very compelling reason to believe that probably indeed is the case. So I came away with this thought about the Lord's Supper, and the carpenter possibly being more likely a stonemason than a carpenter. And so just interesting, sidebars and that kind of thing. Anything else I can help with?
Well, he uses masonry terms in Scripture, so
think about that. Yeah, think about that. But nothing archaeologically, they didn't have anything like this. They didn't, and he was not in an area where he was into shipbuilding. So that's about the only thing they made out of wood were the ships. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious. I've never been there, and nowadays pictures of Jerusalem and places like this shows that it's rather fruitful in trees and farmland and stuff. Is that true?
This will blow your mind. It will blow your mind. Number one, the Jezreel Valley, which is basically the Valley of Megiddo, where Armageddon will take place, is probably one of the most fertile lands in the world, number one. Number two, since the regathering in 1948, Israel, now remember, Israel is just slightly larger than Kern County, okay? Israel has planted over 300 million trees. It's incredible. And you can drive for 200 miles and almost never run out of date trees. Yes, sir.
A lot of people don't realize this. The Gaza Strip that the Palestinians want back, when Israel decided to give it back to them to keep peace,
right,
the Gaza Strip was an oasis. It was like Dubai. I mean, it was motels, hotels, and the Palestinians, the first thing they went in there, and there was crops, vineyards, trees. I mean, the first thing they did, they went in there and destroyed all that they had built. But when it was handed over to them, it was like a Dubai. I mean, it was absolutely an oasis. That was one of the most beautiful places in the world. And now you see what the Gaza Strip looks like because of the Palestinians.
Wow.
They didn't keep their word. They did not make peace after
They never will. Yes, sir.
Well, from Jerusalem to Galilee, they planted 10 million olive trees in that area. 10 million. And they always say you don't plant olive tree for yourself.
Right.
You plant the olive tree for your children because you won't get any fruit.
Right, that's right.
For your children.
That's
get.
right.
And they planted, that land was just basically wild grass when they took it over.
Yeah.
And because the Arabs just used it for grazing sheep and cattle. They're nomads. And then Israel went in when they got control of it, and they planted it heavily with everything. I mean, every square foot gardening over there.
I was told, and I don't have a way to verify that, but I'm told they have planted this 300 plus million trees that they've actually changed or altered their climate because they've planted so many trees. Yes, sir.
Another thing is the trees the Palestinians before the Israel went in there. The date trees were 20 foot high, produced 200 to 300 pounds a year. They produced a tree that's 8 foot high that produces 1,200 pounds a year. That's what the Israelis have went in. A lot of people don't realize that cell phone you've got is designed by the Israelis. Right. The security and our airport system was designed by the Israelis. Don't anybody tell you that little country is not a prosperous country.
If you have a chance, all I can do is say, please, Phil. Yes, ma'am.
Well, the agriculture there is just superior to anything we have. The soil is like potting soil. they water with drip irrigation, and it's the best grapefruit juice you'll ever have.
You know, I had something interesting. I'm diabetic, so I have to stay away from. I couldn't indulge in the donuts, although I was drawn to them rather severely. They make a honey out of dates, and so I bought a couple of jars on a kibbutz, and because they had the honey, they had a version for diabetics. You know, it's supposed to be sugar-free or something like that. And I tasted it, and for hours I was sitting there. My son doesn't know these things. I'm trying to think of it doesn't taste like honey. It tastes like something else, and it was a taste from my childhood. And it took me hours. And finally on the bus, I found it. I said, Rich, Dad, what are you doing? I said, it tastes like sorghum molasses. It's that sweet. Even the diabetic version. It's just incredibly delicious. So the food, you're exactly right. God has blessed them, as He's called it. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I've always noticed there's a bitter taste in sorghum molasses.
There's what?
A bitter taste.
I liked it. Maybe it's because I'm so cut off from sweets most of the time.
The thought of having it.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of walking to that trip?
Yes, there is. You can do it. You can do it.
Another Monday.
We'll all pray for it.
There's a lot that you can see, and there's some very difficult walking, but most of it is not that rough.
We're glad we did it when we did it.
Yeah. If you do some of the things we did, you know, when you go up to the, how many know the story of the Masada?
Been there.
Isn't that beautiful? The Masada, to this day, two things. This is probably the most special place for Jews in Israel. It's a place today where they still go, some of the wealthier Jews, and they'll have their 13-year-old boys hike up to the top. It's 1,500 feet high, and do a bar mitzvah there. It's also the place where every military person who finishes basic training has to run up that thing, and that's where they take their oath to the country when they go in full-time to the military. What happened up there, Masada, is out in the middle of the desert, and it's this 1,500-foot mountain, and there are smaller mountains around it, but nothing connected. And there were roughly 1,000 Jews who lived on top. And the Jewish saying today is never another Masada. And what had happened is Herod was taking over. He had destroyed Jerusalem, AD 70, and all these things going on. And he had a couple of these Jewish outposts that were still resisting, and Masada was one of the last, if not the last. And he sent a general and a lot of men to go conquer Masada and bring back these 950 to 1,000 Jewish slaves. Well, when he got there, it took him about 18 months to build the ramp, siege ramp, 1,500 feet. You remember, they're doing this by bucket at a time, by hand. And all during the time, the Jews up there, these 1,000, were shooting down at them and throwing rocks at them and kind of killing them off. They couldn't much get to it. Well, then Herod gave them 10,000 Jewish slaves to build that siege ramp. They quit. They would not kill their fellow Jews. So in the end, the night before they got up there, they built this big siege piece of equipment to bang through the doors. They'd set the doors on fire about dark, and so they were ready at sunup to take the Masada and take these 1,000 people. Well, there were 11 men there. I guess they were the leaders, and they drew lots. They all agreed to kill their own families. Then they drew lots to see who would kill the remaining 10, and then the last guy would kill himself. So that when the general and the Roman soldiers broke open the doors, they said it was the eeriest thing ever experienced. There were 1,000 people there, and they were all dead. And this guy's concerned because he had no slaves to take back to the king. So Masada holds a very special place even today in the Jewish people's heart. And they say never again. Yes, sir.
Also, when they were building that ramp up there, every time they kill a Roman soldier, they'd take out in the front and they'd kill 2 Jewish slaves.
Yeah.
Every time that they killed a Roman soldier building that, they killed 2 Jewish slaves and just put them in the rubble.
And that's why they quit doing that. And then that allowed them to build the siege and to come to the city. But they would not go. They were not going to go back as slaves. And so Masada is a very powerful place. And many of you have been there. It's a very powerful place to go and see history.
One thing you said, all the soldiers that went up there had to take their own. Every man or woman in Israel is a soldier.
Yes.
Nobody,
Right.
unless you're totally crippled,
Right.
is excluded from military service.
Right, that's correct. Yes, sir.
Another thing that I'd like to point out here, might help you out a little bit, is a lot of people don't realize this. Israel, after the war, when they started coming home, they bought that land. There's not 1 square
Right,
foot of
correct.
that land
That's
of
right.
Israel that was given or taken. They bought all of that land, and when the Palestinians started realizing how fertile and beautiful it was, that's when they started covenant, and that's when the problem started. But if you guys will go to read Ezekiel, 36th chapter of Ezekiel, especially from 32 now, it's where the Lord is saying, I will bring my people home, and you will rebuild the desolate cities. I will build you gardens, fertile gardens, and He's telling what He's going to do to Israel. And that puts all this, what He's saying, in perspective to me as the 36th chapter of Ezekiel. Because the last half, God's telling them, I'm bringing you home, not for your sake, because you don't deserve it,
Right.
but for my name's sake, because I promised you. And I'm going to make these cities that are rubble, the desolate cities, and make them, rebuild them. He's telling about how He's going to make the land fertile. And God said this. And this is exactly what's happening today.
Right, correct. Absolutely.
Beautiful chapter, 36th chapter of Ezekiel. I love it. I think it's one of my favorite in the Bible.
Anything else? Well, I appreciate your inviting me here and being so patient and allowing me to speak a little bit and share my time with you. So God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll take that.
Better take that.
I'll take it, and I'll come back and get my other things, if that's all right.
That's all right.
Thank you so much for coming, for taking
It's a blessing to share, so
taking the
thank you.
time.
God bless you.
Thank you. We've got, matter of fact, you've got a handout. Some of you do. All of you don't have the handout. This is here's your handout right here. So give him one of these. Because there isn't any other. I made the only copy like that there is. Anyone else need any of these for your format?
That was a good talk that you just gave us.
Yeah, it was.
But
that was
everybody
great.
right here.
When I would encourage you to go to the land of Israel if you can. Okay? You may get killed over there. I'm telling you. When I was over there, I dodged bullets
36th chapter.
from 1975 to 1970.
36.
What time I was over there, I heard gunfire every day.
Fantastic.
I dodged bullets. I kept it was my fault that all the people on my tour that were in my archaeological tour didn't get killed. It was my fault. Someone stole my inoculations records out of my pocket. We had to carry them from place to place. When we had been in Jordan and I was spent too long in Syria, I can guarantee you. It was terrible. All the time I was in Syria. We were stopped at the Allenby Bridge where you go from Jordan into Israel. They had stolen my records and I didn't had my passport. But they would steal everything out of your hands. I mean, steal everything. You had to sew your pockets shut. Sew your pockets shut. And they told us to wear them inside, whatever, put money in a money belt, whatever, and put it inside of your pants, so they could steal it. But when we got to the Allenby Bridge, they took our bus, and it was a single file. And the bus that we were on, that we came all the way from Syria on, and into Jordan, they stopped it there, and it was just one bus after the other, and they were going. So they stopped me, and they were going to make me take all the shots all over again. And they stopped our people together. And the bus that we were on, they loaded the people behind us on that bus. And they sent them over there and into Israel. They went into Jericho. Okay? When they got over there in Jericho, they blew the bus to smithereens. Our bus was completely destroyed. I mean, it was blown up. Like the roadside bombs and stuff you're talking about, I mean, it blew it. When we got over there, we heard about this later, but when we got there, we heard the explosion and everything. And when we got to the point where our bus there was nothing there but a frame and burning tires. That's all that was left of it. And the engine, the compartment, everything was just burning. There was nothing left of it. When we got over there to Jericho, we went and I was reading the Greek, and I never was real good at reading the Hebrew script, but I could read some of it. I could read some of the Hebrew script. And I was the one that was reading, so they had me all over. We went over there to Jericho, and Brother Madden, was over there. I talked a lot about Brother Madden. Brother Madden and I slept in the same room all over the Middle East together. And when we got to Jericho, you would hear ching, 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 bullets flying everywhere. Wing, 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 and it'd go dit, like this, and then boom, boom, boom. Bombs, and they were fighting all the time. And we could hear these stray bullets going by, and Brother Madden said, "Boy, makes me want to dig a foxhole." Like that. He said, "This reminds me of," he was over there in World War II. So, and the bus that bus was blown up. We were in another bus in Jerusalem. We were going through things. They blew another bus up. All right. People were shot. They tried to shoot our airplane down. This is hair-raising events. But I'm here to let you know, okay?
Lord, why don't you
What
see
year
it?
was
What
that?
year was that?
1975 and 76. I went over there at the end of the year, and I finished out 75 over there and started the year of 1976 in the Middle East. And when I was flying, when we took off with an old Pan Am airplane from Rome, Italy, I spent a day or so in Rome. The airplane took off, and the airplane was in such terrible condition. I looked out. I was sitting right on the wing, right next to the window, looked out there, and oil was just pouring out of the engine, all the way across the Mediterranean. I'm looking at, and I'm a pretty good mechanic. So I don't know how much oil in that engine. I called, and there's where you change from the girls, being the, whatever you call the stewardess to the stewards. We had a bunch of Arabs there because we were going to go into, and we were going to land in Damascus, Syria. And we had planned to land in Damascus, Syria. Well, I called the steward over there, and I said, "That engine is leaking. Oil, lots of oil." It was streaming. You could just see it just streaming off the wing. And I said, "This isn't safe." I told the guy, "This isn't safe." I said, "Go tell the captain about it." So they told the captain about it. So the captain gets on the intercom, and he's talking in broken English, and he says, "We're going to have to make a landing in Beirut, Lebanon. So you're going to get to land in Beirut, Lebanon." And Brother Madden's sitting over here right by me like this, and we're coming over there. We have to land in Beirut, Lebanon, because the engine is running out of oil. Okay? So we land in Beirut, Lebanon. We're coming down like this, and Brother Madden says, "Look over there, boy. Look over there. Look at those rifles." The cannons were following the rifles. Big rifles, big cannons. They were following the airplane into the airport. They were following us with the rifle barrels. Right into the airport. And when we got down there, we could hear them screaming over the air, telling us not to land. And the guy going, in Arabic, and they're back and forth like this, and they run out there with a Jeep with a machine gun on it and tell nobody to get off. You get off, we'll kill you. And they're arguing and everything. Finally, they come out there with another Jeep, and they grab some oil cans, and they jump up on the side of the engine. They're pouring oil in that engine over there. But I'm going to tell you that all the time that I spent in Israel, I was dodging bullets. It was not safe like it is today. But I saw things that you cannot see today. I went into the cave of Mephilah.
Wow.
I went in there. I walked in there, and all the time they had guns on us. Constantly. Wherever I went, they had guns. A lot of places you could not take pictures at all. You go over there to take pictures of yourself, and you couldn't do it.
How deep did you get in there?
We couldn't go down in the cave. We went down to the mouth of the cave where it is, and then above it you can walk into a building. They built this great big building. The Muslims have done this, okay? And above every tomb of where Abraham is buried, there is a golden sarcophagus up there, up above. Where Jacob is buried, you go over there and you're standing right above where Jacob is buried. You're standing right above where Sarah is buried. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is, talk about cold.
If you were speculating, you actually got to the body, would you actually find the bones or the mummy of Joseph?
That land is so dry over there and everything that I think that the bodies are still there. They say they are. And like I was talking to Brother Larry there, when I read a book, how many of you have biblical background books?
Yeah.
You've got biblical background books. A lot of those were written by people that haven't been there. They only got information. But I can tell when I read a book whether somebody has been there or not. Okay, because it's a whole lot of difference. It's when you go over there, when I talk about this, and I kept pointing to him over there so you could see everything he's talking about right there. See here, this is taken from the Mount of Olives. You're looking down there. See all of those gravestones over here? Those are all gravestones. They want to be buried because when the Lord comes back, they want to be the first ones to be resurrected.
Right.
You know, they want to be the first ones to be resurrected. But I'm telling you, some of them aren't going to be resurrected for 1,000 years after that. 1,000 years. When I was in that land, and I went from one end of it to the other, all the way from Arabia to Egypt to all over the place. And we were more on archaeological. This was part of my schooling. Okay, I was reading the monuments and things. We went to the cities, what we call Decapolis. How many of you know what Decapolis means?
10 cities.
10 cities. All right, 10 cities. When I went there, I was going down and reading the graffiti to those people. I could read uncials in Greek. I had learned to read Greek from the ancient manuscripts. And so I could read all that. I mean, even the ones on there, Brother Matt could read Greek and Hebrew a little bit. But I was the one that, I could read that stuff. So I was telling them what it says, and we went into the ancient temples. All the Romans, their coins were coined in Greek. It was not in Latin. If you look at, how many of you know what the word for Latin is in Latin? What's the word for Latin in Latin? Anybody know? Roman. That's Roman. That's what it is. It's Latin. Well, thank you. I'm glad we had him come in here today. I wanted you to see that facsimile of the Ark of the Covenant. Come back next week. We're going to talk more about it. It's exciting to see somebody go over there and get excited about the land. My wife's been wanting me to take and show pictures. I have slides of Israel. I have slides that you could not even get that stuff today because you can't go there. You can't go in all those places. The reason why you can't go there is not safe. We went there when it was not safe either, but they let you go. But there's too many people killed a long time ago. When I went, people got killed. And they realized that if we take these people into these areas that are not safe, then nobody's going to come when all these people get killed over here. I mean, we got to make it safe. So if you go over there, Brother Bill, it's probably safer than it was when I was there. But I'm going to tell you, when I was there, it wasn't safe. I mean, we got through there by the grace of God. They were going to shoot down our airplane. We flew way up. I could see the curvature of the earth. They were going to shoot our airplane down when we flew from Tel Aviv to Rome, Italy. Yeah.
You know, when we were there just a few years ago, it was so much safer. You could walk around at night. You could go anywhere you wanted to unaccompanied. Wherever Israel was, it was really nice and comforting. You know, they have the young people that are in the army. They're like on every corner, and they're very well trained. We had the communion up near Calvary and the site of Gordon's
tomb.
The Gordon's tomb.
Yeah.
And there was a riot that broke out just below us. There was a couple of Palestinian kids got to some tip after school, and it went from 2 people fighting to 3,000 like that. And and we had our communion, and then we went down there very quickly after that, And they were so good at handling that. And, you know, I used to be captain of the prison. I'm really well trained, and I've trained a lot of people in that. They had the entire place cleaned out. You'd never know it even occurred. And as I was
They want to get the blood up.
I could just barely smell the smell of chemical agents, and I saw a couple shields up against the wall. And that's the only way you never know that anything ever happened there.
Yeah.
Very quickly, like within an hour.
Yeah. Well, they do. When we went over there, we were right after they blew the bus up. All right. And things like that. I mean, there was killings over there when we were over there. They blew the bus up there near Jerusalem. You know, in the line of buses we were going. I went just to everything you could think of over there, and it was wonderful. I'll never forget that. It was just well, it changed my life. If you can do that, I say do it, because it'll change your outlook on the Bible. I know a lot of you people got to leave. David, do you have the prayer things today? Or I can do it. It doesn't matter.
I don't have it.
Okay, we didn't have a prayer sheet out today. We didn't even have a prayer yet today. So let's think about it. I know you're interested in what happened to me. They went down my throat. They took a little piece of thing out of my stomach. They want to put me on some other medication. I can't take it yet because it bothered my colon so bad. I just have suffered terribly with that since then. I still haven't got it straightened out. But continue praying for me, and the other prayer request that you have, how's Irma? Is Irma better?
Oh, Irma's much better.
Much better.
Okay,
All
I
right.
wanted to say, don't forget, next Sunday is breakfast, birthday.
Okay, next Sunday is birthday breakfast, so remember to come bring your appetite with you next Sunday. Are you going to make biscuits and gravy? Are you going to?
I guess so.
Okay. They're always excited about the biscuits and gravy. And when you're not here, I get to do it. So. Anyway, but next Sunday is birthday breakfast Sunday. Do you have any other prayer requests before we be dismissed? All right, thank you for being here. We had a good group today. And I'll talk about, next week, we're going to talk about the altar of incense, and then we're going to get into in detail about the Ark of the Covenant. And you've got some of that stuff laid out. Anything else? Before we go? Any prayer requests? Anything? All right.
I'd like to close this meeting with a prayer.
All right. That'll be all right, Brother.
Ready?
Yeah.
Heavenly Father, we just praise you and thank you. And thank you for a son that gave his life for our sins. And we just thank you for the abundance of people that came today to hear the guest speaker and learn so much about experiences that we haven't had yet, that we are excited to have someday possibly. And we ask special blessing for Jim and everyone else that is having problems. And we know it as we look through life, that especially in my life, that when I was younger, when he was carrying me, the path upon the beach, footprints was very deep. But as I get older and experiences, they get lighter for me. But some people, they get heavier. So we just thank you for always being there to carry us and love us and accept us and help us in our walk in life. We just praise you and thank you. Amen.
Thank you, too, for being here, your family today. Good to have you. Brother Wally, thank you for leading us in prayer.
Good song.